Adventures in Retouching with Rob DiCaterino.
Welcome to Adventures in Retouching, where we talk about the retouching industry, our experiences, and you get to learn tips. You get to learn about the job. You get to learn about options, career paths. I'm Rob DiCaterino. Today, I am joined by my friend and colleague, fellow retoucher, Erin Nocera. Welcome to Adventures in Retouching.
Hello.
I'm in New Jersey. Where are you, Erin?
Upstate New York in the woods.
Okay, very good. Hey, sounds good. Sounds nice. So you know what? Let's jump right in. And can you walk me through your background?
So I started using Photoshop when I was 10, and I started with Photoshop 5 all the way back. I don't even know what year that was. Probably 99, 98, something like that. And I used to just draw like pictures in it because I like to draw. So I was like drawing with the mouse. And then I got my first tablet when I was about 12, when I had my own computer. Then I got into drawing and doing graphic design a little bit. Then when I was about 15, I got into photography. So then I started messing with my own photos. And that kind of grew into actually doing real photography and real retouching rather than just silly up the contrast type stuff. So by the time I graduated high school, I ended up being able to just freelance right out the door. So I didn't end up going to college. I actually went to beauty school and became a hairdresser. That didn't work out, but I continued freelancing for pretty much ever until about, what year was that? I guess 2015 when you hired me at Net-a-Porter. So then I worked there for a while and still do some freelancing on the side. And now I just kind of do some graphic design things here and there as I'm trying to deal with my personal health. So I'm a little bit on a hiatus from typical work schedules right now, but I hope to get back into freelancing at some point.
So you started out experimenting in Photoshop and then experimenting in photography.
Mm-hmm.
How did you end up on a retouching career path?
Well, initially, I didn't know that that could be a career path. I had no idea. So I thought the only way to just do Photoshop all day was to also be a photographer. So for a long time, I tried to do, I did freelance photography for quite a while, even though not my favorite thing to do is the actual taking the photos. Not 100% sold on that part, but I loved the other side of it. I loved post work, and I had a couple of clients that I had never met before. They had emailed me asking for me to just retouch their photos. And I thought to myself, I'm like, how do I do this all day? Like, this is what I want to do all day. But I didn't really get into the retouching career per se until an old friend of mine got into it, and she hadn't gone to college either, and she told me she got this job in New Jersey, and I was like, oh, what is that? And then so lo and behold, I ended up working there. So that's kind of how I got into it. But I guess for the longest time I had wanted to do that and just didn't know that it was actually a job you could do.
Again, you're experimenting in photography. You're experimenting in Photoshop and retouching. You're interested in a job in retouching once you found out that that was a thing, because a lot of people don't know that that's a thing.
Yeah.
So again, part of this show, why we're talking, is to show people like that. Hey, you if you went to school for art or photography or or you're interested in art or photography, you're a creative person, well, this is an option. This is a thing that exists.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so you're doing photography, you're doing Photoshop, retouching, you're obviously a very creative person. What is it about retouching that attracted you, or that fascinated you? Like, what was it about it that just spoke to you?
I really love finishing images and having them be finished and look at them and be like, okay, it's not just a picture anymore. Now it's a photograph. Like, it's different. It's moved from something that could be really good into something that's undeniably good. And I always like that. But I think the real thing that drew me to retouching specifically was that didn't have to deal with the client as much, honestly. That really, like, the people in the photo or whatever it is, like, I didn't really like dealing with photography because of that. And then I prefer being behind a computer if I could help it. I kind of like getting in my zone, getting into work, and it's kind of like, I always thought of it as like a new version of a factory. Like, I don't know, it's like kind of like work you can just zone out on, in a way, depending on what you're doing. Usually if you're doing something every day, you know, you get to the point where you can just zone out on it, and I don't know, it's kind of relaxing sometimes. It's weird to explain.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, zone out in a good way.
Yeah.
Like get in the zone. Like more like almost meditative.
Yeah, definitely. It's because you can, all that brain space that you like are using for retouching, after a while you're not really using it. It's like kind of like muscle memory in a way. You just know what has to be done and you do it, and then all this brain space is open for other things like listening to music or podcasts at the same time, audiobooks. I listen to like over 50 audiobooks, probably, working at Net-a-Porter for those 3 years, 50 plus probably. Hundreds of podcasts, countless albums. Like, I feel like I consumed more things working, actually, which is strange, but I always loved that dynamic of being able to like get and do your work, and then, you know, you're doing your work at the same time you're able to do something else. That was like a dynamic that I loved always.
There's editorial retouching and advertising and marketing. There's e-commerce retouching. What kind of retouching do you prefer?
I prefer model, like beauty shots, editorial, and still life, or really heavy manipulation type style, like where it's a lot of work. You have to like comp in something from another picture and try to make it work together. I kind of like that stuff because I feel like the beauty and editorial and still life is like a slightly creative, I guess, because it's like still life, you can kind of move stuff around a little bit, you know, try to make it the most pleasing to the eye as you possibly can. And it's kind of the same thing with the other stuff. I mean, beauty, I really love manipulating the skin. It's a challenge, and also kind of meditative rather. It's fun to me. I like that stuff. Or just completely changing an image, doesn't even look like the original image. I like all those things, are kind of my favorite.
So, Erin, can you explain what setup you use and equipment, the hardware, the software?
I was using Mac for a long time, but I've shifted back now to Windows. So now I'm using a Windows 10 desktop with a Wacom tablet, like the medium size one. And I use Photoshop and Lightroom typically. I don't typically use too many other programs unless I'm doing something more graphical, and then maybe I'll open up Illustrator.
How do you feel about non-Adobe software? Have you dabbled? Do you use any non-Adobe software?
So I haven't used a Photoshop like replacement program necessarily. I don't usually like them just because I'm impatient. So I just end up going back to Photoshop. But I do enjoy some like other types of programs like Corel Painter sometimes if I was doing like some more like manipulative work and I wanted to add texture or whatever. Sometimes I would make the textures in Painter and do it that way.
What does retouching mean to you? What is retouching?
It's like a combination of finishing, fixing, transforming. That's usually what it means to me. So yeah, I think that's the best way I could describe it.
How do you feel about over-retouching? And what is the line between, quote, good retouching and dangerous retouching?
That one's definitely a hard question. Over retouching is worse than under retouching. I'll say that. But I don't really think that there is a line that's dangerous. Like, it's just whether it's aesthetically pleasing or not. So there are certain things that I would consider dangerous, which would be like that glow you get on those old school kind of images where they like blow it out and it's all like fadey looking with try to like blur out their skin and stuff. That's dangerous to me. Or what I said earlier with the selective color where like the rose is in color and then the husband and wife is not. Like I can't, that's a big no. Or too much clarity on an image, you just hike that up for no reason on like a picture of a person. That's like a big no-no to me. I don't really think that anything other than ugly work, I mean, or ugly, like not aesthetically pleasing work is, you know, I don't think anything other than that is dangerous personally.
Erin, how have you evolved as a retoucher, and what has helped you along in that evolution?
The things that made me evolve were definitely just finding new techniques and hearing, you know, being trained by others such as yourself and the other people that I worked with. Like, I think those were the biggest turning points for me because I always learn by doing or being shown something. So somebody shows me something and then I go and apply it in my own way to a thing. So I remember the first day that I actually learned how to truly use Puppet Warp. That was a fun day. I enjoyed that day. Or learning how to use the mixer brush in Photoshop. Like, I love that one. Yeah, so I mean, every day, you never know who's going to teach you something.
Do you ever look back on your old work? And if so, how do you feel about your old work compared to your work now?
Yeah. I actually really enjoy my old work. It's really fun to me because since I had started so young, I can go back and see what I did when I was like 10. And like, that's hilarious. You can't even be like upset about it. You're 10, like I'm 10 when I did this. How could I be upset? So the funny thing about that is I can go back, see that work, and then by the time I was 15, I already had 5 years experience in Photoshop. So it's not necessarily as cringy as it sounds, like, because I learned a lot. So the cringiest things I ever shot or retouched, they were all before I was even 18.
So Erin, let's pretend for a minute. And let's say you're the manager of a retouching team. And your team is expanding. And you need to hire a junior retoucher. What are some things for a junior level retoucher, someone just starting out? What are some of the things that you're going to look for on a resume, on a website, in the portfolio?
Or a retouch test?
Yeah.
As far as resume goes, don't make your resume too wordy. That's so annoying. You don't look smarter. I swear, you don't look smarter. Um, Leave the resume at bare bones and then show it in your work. I mean, like, go hard on your work, have some really good befores and afters, and make sure the afters actually look better. That's a big thing. They have to look better. Have a variety of stuff. Like, you should have something in there that has a silhouette, you cut it out on a white background. You have at least one of those in there. Maybe have something that shows you adjusted the color. And then on your test, I think that you absolutely need to be using adjustment layers and layer masks and tablet proficiency and hotkey proficiency. Use your hotkeys. Don't ignore them. Learn them as soon as you can.
Yeah, it's a great answer and also great advice. You know why? Because people starting out, maybe a recent graduate from a college, maybe someone pivoting who has an existing career, wants to pivot. Adobe Photoshop, there's 100 different tools. So it's very easy for somebody to get lost. I remember when I was first starting out, it's like, wow, this tool and this tool. And it was just so overwhelming. I didn't even bother learning 99% of the tools. Like, oh, I know the brush, I know the lasso. Look at me, I'm playing around in Photoshop. So yeah, great advice, because it is so overwhelming. There's so much that Photoshop does. To focus in on those basics is really valuable advice. So thank you.
Definitely. There's so many ways to do a selection that you choose what way works for you. But the other two things, masking and adjustment layers, that isn't going to change. There's only one way to do them. So you have to learn how to use them.
Erin, in your experience, what are some of the things that you encounter or that people do that make your life as a retoucher harder, more difficult, more frustrating? And then the opposite, what are things that make your life as a retoucher easier and more enjoyable and happy?
Yeah. So the things that make it harder, just bad photography. That's number one. I mean, it's always going to be that because that's what you're working with. So the quality of the photography you're working with directly correlates to whether or not you're going to have a good time or not. So that's usually it. I mean, bad computers, definitely slow computers are going to be, other than that, it's really nothing that's going to be blocking it. It's always the photography or your computer or just you having a bad day, but you can't help that sometimes. So, if you can manage to get to work with really good photographers, you're mostly going to be golden, I think, unless you if you're in e-com, you're going to get some really difficult items sometimes.
So like, what's an example of something that happens on set, or an approach, or part of the process somebody doesn't think of? Like, just what's an example of like the bad photography, or you wish, like, why didn't they what? Why didn't they what?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest thing when I was working on jewelry was a focus layer from the wrong angle. Like, you're getting an image shot from one angle, and then you need these focus layers because the item is really small. So you get the focus layers so that you can comp it all together and make it look totally in focus. But then one image is just not from the right angle. Why? Why is that?
Do you ever get any requests that you feel like are unreasonable, or if this person only understood, if this person only had some knowledge or experience, they wouldn't be asking me to do this?
Definitely. And but what's funny is I actually didn't have that experience too much with e-com. This experience for me was always with personal clients, specifically weddings. I cannot go through 200 photos and make you 10 pounds lighter in every single photo. That would be an exorbitant amount of money you would be spending on me doing that. Not saying it's impossible for me to do, but They really should have just been truthful and been like, I really want you to paste this celebrity's face on my face because I would like that better than looking at a picture of myself. But you can't help that. You can't help that. You just got to kind of roll with the punches and give them realistic expectations from the get-go. So if they're asking anything after the fact, you know you covered your bases.
Can you describe, as a retoucher, what is your relationship with the other people involved in the process? And how is it different? How is it the same across different types of retouching?
Well, with wedding retouching, if you are the wedding photographer, you're making all the decisions. But if you're not, hopefully the wedding photographer has given you notes on the images like that they want you to fix, which for that would be the same throughout all of them. If you're not the photographer and you're retouching separately, the photographer should give you notes on the image to be able to adjust it to how they want it or however it needs to be done.
In e-com, if you have the benefit of working all together, all the teams working together in one studio, the photographers, the stylists, merch people, writers, producers, retouchers, can you describe what that experience is like and the communication, the relationships?
It's definitely easier working all in the same spot together because you can just kind of go over there and let them know you have this and this issue or this and this, or you need this done faster. It's kind of nice because if you do have an issue, you can go solve it much, much quicker than if you're working at home, communicating only via email. Definitely easier when you're all in the studio together.
Okay, so we talked about junior level retoucher. What are the fundamentals someone needs to know when applying for a job? How about someone maybe a little more of it, like maybe mid-level retoucher? Do you have any tools, techniques, tips, advice for maybe how that person would continue to progress?
Have a variety of work in your portfolio. So you should have like silhouetted things, e-commerce style. You should have editorial, you should have beauty, you should have still life, you should have products, something of each to show that you can do basically anything. You want to be able to like show you have versatility, I think, because if they need you to do a weird project that's maybe not typical for them, it's kind of nice to have the skills to be able to say, oh, I can do that, or I can make GIFs, or something like that. It's nice to be able to have the extra skills and definitely be good. You have to just practice and learn every little thing that could possibly be useful for like each of those styles. You might need puppet warp for a pair of pants. You never know when you're gonna need these tools. So it's good to just know what's available so that you can choose the best tool for the job when it comes up.
In your opinion, Erin, are there any related skills that would help a retoucher?
Being able to troubleshoot your computer. That is number one, because things come up in the office and your neighbor is having a problem. And if you know the exact way to slam on somebody's keyboard to make it work, that's helpful. Other than that, I found just having art skills in general, because then you kind of get the gist of blending techniques and other types of things that could be helpful if you need them, because there were a couple times you end up having to paint something in. So it's kind of nice to be able to just have that skill. Learning how to paint in Photoshop, definitely not the same as learning how to retouch, but learning how to paint definitely helps you retouch.
How about, can you give any thoughts or advice or insight into color?
You need to learn the color wheel. Learn the color wheel inside and out as best as you can, as many times as you can. Constantly go over it. Like, I have actually formally learned the color wheel probably about 7 times in my life, just by whatever things happen in my life, like, regular art classes in school and then advanced art classes. You always go over it every time. And then I went to beauty school. You have to learn the color wheel there too, and just so on and so on. I learned it so many times. You need to know that inside and out so that you know what to blend to make the right color.
So you mentioned go-to tools. What are some of your go-to tools?
Depends on what I'm doing. Lately, I actually do a lot of art. So my go-to tools right now typically are the mixer brush, or just the brush in general to paint. And then using my own stock photos and adjusting them with other like random things. Sometimes it's liquify, sometimes it's displacement maps, blending modes. Blending modes, I overlay a lot of stuff. And a lot of times I'll use darken, especially on products. Darken is helpful. Beauty products in particular, with like bottles where you have to put the writing back on it because it got blown out. Darken, I find, is very helpful. Darken and lighten. I think I use blending modes quite a bit compared to some other people.
Can you talk about, yes, there's the artistic aspect of retouching, like you said, being able to know painting techniques and fill things in, cover things up. There's also the technical side of retouching, being able to read values, RGB values or CMYK values, so actual numbers, and not just I have an eye and I can see. Yes, you need an eye. That's very important, but also just the number side, the technicals, the histograms.
I use the RGB the most probably for jewelry, because you get certain brands that are like, this diamond is this color and it has to be this exact color every single time, no matter what it actually looks like. So, you can't use your eye on that because they don't want you to use your eye on that. They want you to use this exact set of numbers. So you have to know how to use it and know how to check it for sure.
Erin, what do you see for the future of retouching, the future of the industry? Where's it going?
I know when I was still working at Net-a-Porter, multiple countries enacted laws about retouching. Like, you weren't allowed to retouch the models and adjust their bodies at all, which I understand why people might not want to do that. But granted, that's just related to models. But the other part of me, sees like stuff like Snapchat, or not Snapchat anymore, but any of those filters you can put in when you taking selfies and stuff, and it just automatically like smooths out your face. I'm like, how long until they develop the technology and add that to a real camera? And then what do I have to do? Where's my job? I'm a little pessimistic on these points, but I will say there is always going to be a place for a really good retoucher. It's just a matter of how many of us are needed and what kind of work it changes to, because the technology is always going to change. So you have to be on your toes and always learning the new versions.
Do you have any good memories that you can share, funny anecdotes, experiences that come to mind that you can share?
The thing that came to mind first was probably constantly giving each other insane birthday cards. Just photoshopping our faces on movie posters, or you photoshopping everyone's faces on 80s portraits. That one was phenomenal work. Really phenomenal. Just ridiculous things like that. Just working with retouchers, you're gonna get made into a meme at some point. Like, you can't escape it. You just can't. Or you're just gonna, if you're working in e-commerce where there's models involved, where they're in like strappy shoes, some of the feet sometimes they're rough. They are rough, and we zoom in on them and torture each other with it. So that one was fun, you gotta have fun at the office, right? You gotta have at least something to like open up your email and laugh at once in a while.
Those were some very funny moments with the
Yeah.
putting our heads onto models and just goofing around once in a while.
Yes,
And,
or ridiculousness of the items we'd see in high fashion. They are ridiculous sometimes, so they must be photoshopped onto other ridiculous images. It just calls for it. You have to do it. Duty calls.
Yes. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that I forgot to ask or didn't bring up that you thought was valuable or important?
I think for me, it's just, you know, if you've never tried something like a specific style of retouching or whatever it may be, you need to try it immediately. Like, just jump headfirst into it and try it. You have nothing to lose. And you really should never take for granted something somebody else is telling you. Even if they have less experience than you, you never know what tool they might use that you've never tried. You have no idea. And you should never, ever, ever, ever take it for granted or blow it off. Always, always, always listen and take advice and strive to be better.
How does somebody do, like, hey, I've never retouched beauty products before. Oh, great, I'm going to follow Erin Nocera's advice and I'm going to try it. How do I do that? What do I do? Step one, how do I try that?
I guess you'd have to find some images on Google of some form, or if somebody has maybe some toolkits available, something to download that is, you know, something you could try out. Actually, that's a good idea for you if you wanted to put something like that together. It's not a bad idea to have, like, download my stuff on my website, be able to try out all these techniques on your own on the stock images. But my advice would be find some stock images that are unretouched and work on them. Try your best and see how far you get on it. Find a way to try it. You know, even if it's like something as simple as like, oh, I just heard of split frequency. What is this? Play with it. Do it on like a ridiculously textured image and try it out. Play with it, all the settings, see what you can get out of it, you know? And so that way you know when you actually need to apply it.
So it's great advice. So now I'm at home, I'm on my own. I find some photos of a new category that I haven't tried before, and I'm going to start experimenting and testing myself out and trying. How do I know what to make it look like?
For, let's say, a beauty product image, go to a beauty product website, look at those finished images, see what it looks like, see what your unretouched image looks like. How do you make it more like that? How do you make it as polished looking as that? Just try it out. See how far you get.
Yeah, I like the idea of visiting a brand's website, looking at the final product, looking at a starting point version of a sim. It doesn't have to be the exact image, but something along the same lines, and get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
The puzzle, right? It's like a puzzle.
It is a puzzle.
Yeah. So, Erin, thank you so much for being on Adventures in Retouching. Where can people find you online?
They can find me at Isolationista, kind of like Fashionista, except I'm isolated. That's a way to find me on Instagram. That's pretty much where I'm at online right now.
Well, Erin, thank you so much again. This was fantastic. Adventures in Retouching. I'm Rob DiCaterino. Leave comments, ask questions. If you need advice, if you want to know something, if you want to learn something, if you want us to look at your resume, if you want me to look at your website, your portfolio, I'm here to help. So leave those comments, ask those questions, get in touch. and keep watching. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.